Nice to see you all. I'll open with welcoming everybody to the meeting, including those in the public gallery. The housekeeping announcements are everything you know them to be. Fire escape, fire evacuation, there is no scheduled fire alarm. If it does go off, it's for real, and we'll visit the windmill, the car park of the windmill. As far as microphones are concerned, I think you all know the drill. The important thing is that people who are watching this from the comfort of their own homes or offices can hear you, and they can't hear you unless you speak clearly into the microphone. So that's old news for you. So we can get on to the agenda, and the agenda starts with apologies, I believe.
We have apologies from Councillor Alcock for who Councillor Ballinger is subbing.
Welcome, Councillor Ballinger. Items, disclosure of interest. Are there any councillors who have any item of interest or interest to disclose in relation to any matters that we are likely to consider this morning? Take that as none, thank you.
Councillor Ballinger, sorry.
Councillor Ballinger.
It's regarding, I've just taken some advice. It's regarding section 7, and we're talking about SIL. Obviously, a lot of the SIL items are potentially projects or items within our retrospective wards, and there's one in my ward in particular that I know about, but I do come with an open mind in respect of talking about that item as a whole.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a problem that we all have. Understood.
Just to confirm, basically to enable business to be conducted, I'm happy to grant a dispensation for members on this point.
Your intervention, Councillor Ballinger, was very apt and productive. Thank you. Minutes of previous meeting. Minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of May. Pretty brief. And on the 15th of May, a bit more voluble. Can I take it that those minutes are a true and fair record of those two meetings? Is there anybody who dissents? Those minutes are approved. They will be signed. Thank you. Chairman's brief. I'm conscious that what I'm about to say is well-intentioned, but requires trust from you if it's to proceed. And that is a proposal that a task and finish group should be formed with the intention of investigating current support given by the council to residents who are experiencing difficulties with meeting the cost of living, in order that the Cabinet can review current practices, current budgets, and decide if they want to make any change at all. There is a need for speed, because if this is to proceed, it has to be productive and produce its output by the middle of October. If that is to happen, then we need to get on and form it to enable the working group, the task and finish group, to stand a chance of undertaking its task and meeting its objectives. Over the past couple of weeks, I've had conversations with officers and councillors. There is support for this generally from officers and at least some councillors. This is not a party political matter, since the previous administration initiated support, a budget for supporting cost of living challenges, and the current administration has carried that on. So the object of the exercise is not to throw stones either the preceding or the current administration. It is merely to review the support which is currently given. To the Cabinet may be able to say to themselves, we've looked at this, or the Task and Finish group has looked at this. The way we are currently spending this money is leading to the best possible effect for the benefit of residents, or maybe there are tweaks that could be made. The object of the exercise, therefore, is simply to provide the Cabinet with information which leads them to either confirm or question their existing practices or the way they spend the budget. But if this is to have effect, then it's got to produce its output by the middle of October, which stands some chance of influencing the budget decisions for next year. Discussions have gone on. Draft terms of reference have been produced. They have not been finalised. They cannot be finalised, but the officers haven't yet had a chance to review them. So it is premature to bring those forward. I'm asking essentially for a decision in principle of whether there is support for the formation of this Task and Finish group, in order that terms of reference can be discussed, finalised, to the point of being ready for submission to our next meeting on the 13th of July. They can then be confirmed. If we could agree who would be on this Task and Finish group now, rather than on the 13th of July, that would be, in my terms, a help, because those people could then, they'd know what their task is, and they could be thinking about it, making their inquiries and gathering information and so on, doing their preliminary work. But before I open the matter open for discussion amongst councillors, I'd like to invite Mr. Perks, if he'd say a few words.
Thank you, Chair. I probably don't have a lot to add to what you've sort of introduced there. Yes, when you took over as Chair, when we were sort of doing our initial briefings, one of the things you raised with me was, where did you think a Task and Finish group would be valuable? And as officers, I think we would appreciate a look into the cost of living. It's an issue that all parties support. We're providing quite a lot of resource in various different schemes to there. But it would be useful, I think, to inform the 26-27 budget if someone were to have a look at that and sort of make sure, is what we're doing effective? Could it be refined? Are we hitting the right areas? And I think a piece of scrutiny work on that would be very valuable to the council sort of going forward. So as officers, we would encourage a Task and Finish group in this area. I've approached Hannah Buckley, our Head of Housing and Communities, whom her staff would be more than happy to support the group. She'll it's back. She will happily work with the terms of reference to make sure that we're effective. So yes, broadly, we're supportive of this if it's something the committee would like to resource.
Thank you. Open for debate, Councillor Rolfe.
Thank you, Chair. I am slightly surprised at this. I was equally surprised to receive an email on Monday addressed to two of my Lib Dem colleagues and one Conservative colleague, asking us to be part of that Task and Finish group. I think that's the wrong way of dealing with it. I think it's against the democratic process. It's also against the democratic process to suggest that Councillor Crump is the chair of that group. I'm just very, very surprised that receiving that email. I think that email, I think what you have just said is open and honest and transparent, and that's how it should be. I really didn't like getting that email to be chosen. If you want me to tell you who was the chosen ones, it was Councillor Rice, myself and Councillor Alcock and Councillor Littlewood. But, you know, to be told that you'd like those people to be on that Task and Finish group, and to be told that Councillor Crump is suggested as the chair is not the democratic process that we should be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. Just for information, you're quite fair to point to my email to a number of councillors sent on Monday, which begins, the purpose of this email is to write to you to accept a nomination to join. I didn't, in that sense, I simply didn't appoint or didn't allude to a point. I simply invited people to accept, would they be prepared to be nominated. On that basis, Councillor Johnston was next to speak. Councillor Worley-Hargens next.
I'm interested that we haven't yet seen the terms of reference for this group. I recognise the cost of living is the major issue for the public today. We've just seen another hike in energy prices literally today. I think I would like to ask for the next meeting that we, as well as see the terms of reference, but get some briefing from officers about what the district council is currently doing, and maybe within the terms of reference some kind of statement about things that we might be able to do if we have the authority or the resources to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'm not sure if we have a meeting in 2 weeks' time whether that picture would be available in that timescale. That is the first item that I would see the task and finish group having to establish exactly what the current position is. But it's perfectly fair that terms of reference haven't been agreed and certainly haven't been presented. They haven't been agreed by officers. That's what officers would be comfortable with. It's not for officers to approve, it's for the committee to approve, and I do accept those terms of reference haven't been seen yet. Councillor Worley-Hargens.
Yes, I sit here in somewhat bewildered state. There's no email to me on Monday. I would have thought that if you're really keen on ensuring the effectiveness of this group, that you need to look back at one of the most effective task and finish groups that we've seen from this committee, which is the Housing Association Working Group, which is absolutely cross-party. I'm astonished that as a member of this committee and also as the leader of the Reform UK group on this council, that I've had no knowledge of this, and neither have we received an invite to participate within this vital, as you say, working party task and finish group. I think it's a very sad reflection of, actually, this is obviously very political, and leaving both the Green Party and myself out of this when we've worked very effectively on other task and finish groups is a sad indictment of this council. Thank you.
Your displeasure is noted. This is the opportunity for you to express your point of view, and you just have. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Councillor Keithley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I'm a bit surprised as well, to be honest, because I didn't know anything about this and I haven't been invited to be on this task and finish group. In my experience of sitting on this committee, we've had a work plan and we've sort of tried to work ahead and keep abreast of the things that we were going to look at as a scrutiny committee. I haven't seen this item on a work plan, and frankly, Chair, I think it would be really good to have an update from Hannah Buckley and the portfolio holder on the work that's being done currently, what's been delivered, and all the agencies that we're probably working with to deliver this cost of living support to residents. So I'm surprised.
Thank you, Councillor Keithley. The reason why there is no item to do the work programme is because it was omitted from the agenda for an unknown reason. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. I must say that I am a little concerned that the Deputy Chief Executive thinks that this is something that should be looked at, because I would have thought, I would have hoped that given the enormous number of groups and bodies that are associated with this work that are funded by the council, that the Deputy Chief Executive should think that somebody needs to look at how the money is being spent. I would have hoped that that was already pretty clear, and I'm not sure whether there's a problem or not. And okay, maybe that is the purpose of the task and finish group. But it seems to me that, and I'm making a large assumption, as it seems to me, Mr. Chair, that you're making the assumption that something needs to be fixed. And I think I'm making the assumption that if it ain't fixed, if it ain't broke, why try and fix it?
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I think the response to that would be that the responsibility of the Deputy Chief and his colleagues as executives is to implement policy. The intention I had of the purpose of this task and finish group would be to question policy. Is the policy of where we spend money the way we think is the most effective? I don't cast any aspersions on the executive's ability to spend money in line with current policy, and I don't think that was the intention at all. But I hear what you say, and I hear what you say, Chairman of Council. Councillor Whalley-Hoggins.
Yes, I would very much like to be part of this working party, because it was, in fact, the Reform UK party who, in their speech, at the budget speech in February, flagged up the fact that there was a massive financial strain within the district. I've actually got a speech here. I said then that residents are financially weary. The staggering number of hours, 195 hours, I think, on an average wage that people are working to pay a council band D council tax, and to be omitted from this email and excluded from this email and excluded from this working party, as I said before, is a shocking state of affairs, when in fact it was us that raised the matter back in February. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hoggins. You were in good company in being excluded from this email. It went to 4 people deliberately. Misplaced, maybe, but you weren't alone. I'm going to... Councillor Passingham.
Yeah, just quickly. Yeah, it is obviously a very important subject. It's a big issue for probably a third of the population. But yeah, I'd like to have a presentation from Hannah Buckley to know exactly what's going on at the moment before actually deciding on a task and finish.
Sir Rolf.
I would endorse that. I don't think there is any need for a task and finish group until we find out on the 13th what this council are doing for everyone out there, because, sorry, what this council is doing. I must get my... so I don't think there is any need today to form a task and finish group until we have our meeting on the 13th. And I would ask that the portfolio holder and Hannah Buckley is asked to come and give us a breakdown. Thank you.
Thank you. On that basis, I'm going to conclude the discussion of that item. I withdraw my proposal. I take note of the request for a briefing from Hannah Buckley, and we will consider that, how best we can do that and when we can do that. Thank you. Moving on. Public participation. I don't see any members of the public. No. Nobody from the public. Fine. Item 6 on the agenda is an update on devolution and local government reorganisation. Mr. Buckland has approached the table, so I presume Mr. Buckland.
We've not met him.
No.
He's new here.
At your leisure.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Good morning, everybody. Just to give an update on where we are at the moment on local government reorganisation and what we're expecting to hear in the near future. As you'll be aware, the Council made its submission back in November last year. The Council supporting the two unitary solution for the future local government within Warwickshire. The County Council and Rugby supporting a single unitary Warwickshire. Now, we have been told for some time that we could expect the decision before Parliament rises in this summer, and that would be the 16th of July at the very, very latest. We have got a competition, if you like. I don't know, the resignation from the current Prime Minister, and along with that came the statement that then no new major policy or spending commitments will be made until the conclusion of the leadership contest. That said, there was a ministerial webinar last week, which was taken by Alison McGovern, that stated clearly that government are still expecting to make the decision on a single or two unitary Warwickshire by the 16th of July. So whatever happens, we're expected to get a short heads up, probably no more than an hour or so, a heads up about the decision before then there is a decision announced in the House of Parliament by the Secretary of State. And government are still, well, they've reiterated again that implementation will still happen on the 1st of April 2028, and that's still the date that government are seeking to implement local government reorganisation for Warwickshire, along with the the other 20 council areas also facing the reorganisation in that particular area. There was some discussion at Cabinet and at the last meeting, and we will be bringing forward a report to the September cycle of the Cabinet, and it'll come through the Reviews and Scrutiny Committee and onto Employment Committee about the implementation plan for local government reorganisation and also the potential impact on staff during that particular process. I know that point around that was mentioned surrounding the performance report that we had at the Cabinet meeting last time. So there will be a further report on that, and it is referred to in the out-term report that's also on the Cabinet for this particular time. One piece of work that we have spent some time addressing over the last few weeks is about the detail that would be contained in the structural changes order. The structural changes order are effectively the rules of the game that we play before the Shadow Council elections, which are scheduled for May 2027. And we as a council, well, I was asked my opinion on what I believe those rules should be, and therefore convened a meeting of the Devolution and Local Government Working Group to get the opinion of members to help inform my decision. So if I just run through some of the points that were covered within that, the first one was our view was sought about the potential name of any new council. And I will say Stratford, along with all the other local authorities within Warwickshire, have agreed that in the event of a single unitary, then it should be called Warwickshire Council. And in the event of a two unitary, definitely called a South Warwickshire Council, but with some alternatives suggested for the North Warwickshire Council, and the suggestion particularly coming from Rugby is that it could be called a Northern Warwickshire Council, or it could be called North and East Warwickshire Council, or it could be North Warwickshire with Rugby Council. So these are options which government will consider and will be within the structural changes order. Following the publication of the structural changes order, a joint committee will be formed, and that joint committee will sit for a period before the Shadow Council elections, and they will make decisions including recommendations on the future statutory officers for the new council to be formed. Now, we've been asked for our view as to how that committee is made up. Government are proposing that they use the same rules which are being used in Surrey at the moment, and that would see 50% of the membership of that joint committee coming from the county council and 50% coming from the district and boroughs. The position that I reported back in the letter to government from this council was actually we would like equal representation, as was the case in areas such as Northamptonshire and Cumbria, in that if there were to be a north or a south, then make up of 3 members from the county council, 3 from the district council and 3 from Warwick District Council. We will have to wait to see what government will do, but I do expect them to proceed on the same basis as they have for Surrey, and therefore equal membership from the two. We have had a change of position from the leader of the Warwickshire County Council. Previously, the leader, the position from Warwickshire County Council was a single unitary Warwickshire, but that should then be a continuing authority. The view from the leader there now is that it should actually be a new authority, which is quite significant. And that was the view that this council, all the other districts and boroughs had supported that. So we have agreement across the piece. That response went back to government on that particular issue. One of the main issues, and will give Mason a headache, I'm sure, are some of the electoral arrangements that will be in the structural changes order, which will govern the first set of elections in May 2027. We are now told we're not going to get our final structural changes order until March 2027. Within March, we will have to publish notification for poll for the elections in May 2027. And apparently in Westmoreland and Furness, they got the structural changes order a whole 10 days before they had to then do the notification of poll. We have choices about how the elections, what the makeup of the new councillors will be in the new council. And the option, the business case that was submitted from both the county and the district identified that you could all use electoral divisions, the existing electoral divisions at the county, or you could use the district and ward boundaries from across the piece. In the event of a single unitary Warwickshire, there's agreement across all councils that the existing electoral divisions should be used. There is a slight issue in that 2 of those divisions, including one in Stratford-on-Avon district area, is outside of tolerance for electoral purposes, in bit that they have, I think it's in excess of 30% higher than the average for the electoral divisions. That can be solved in one of 2 ways. You can either have, sorry, I should have explained. The proposal is to have 2 elected members per electoral division. So on 57 electoral divisions, that would return 114 councillors. With this imbalance, one is in Warwick and one is in Stratford. It could be solved by potentially changing the division boundaries slightly, or having a 3rd councillor in each of those 2 electoral divisions. That's to be determined, but everybody's agreed that we should actually use the electoral divisions, and actually they would become electoral wards under the new arrangements, because under a unitary basis they would become wards. Under a 2 unitary decision, we don't have complete agreement across the piece. Ourselves and Warwick District Council would prefer to use the existing district boundaries for district wards for those elections. That would result in 85 councillors across South Warwickshire, and if that was replicated in the north, 115 councillors for the North Warwickshire. Our North Warwickshire colleagues and the County Council would prefer to use the electoral divisions for a 2 unitary solution, and therefore that would return 50, and potentially up to 56 councillors for a South Warwickshire and 60 councillors for a North Warwickshire. We do have some concerns, given the amount of committees that the new council would have, that whether it would be enough councillors to undertake those particular roles. So the decision from the working group the other day was to support use of the district and ward boundaries, and therefore 85 councillors. We do have an issue about parish and town councils. Parish and town councils always have their elections at the same time, well, they have historically had them at the same time as the district council, and the parish and town councils only then have to fund the over and above cost of holding those elections alongside the elections proper. Now, in May 2027, we are expecting the Shadow Council to be elected at the same time as the town and parish councils, and therefore that principle would follow for May 2027. However, the Shadow Council elections will be for a 5-year period and not a 4-year period. They would have 1 year in shadow and then 4 years proper in their role as the new councillors for the new unitary authority. And therefore, we have requested that consideration is given by government to extend the term for the town and parish council elections in May 2027 also to 5 years, and then they would come into synchrony with the new council going forward, because it would then be on a 4-year cycle thereafter for the following elections. So, Chair, I think I'll leave it there. We are, as I say, still expecting the decision by the 16th of July. The decision has to be made when Parliament is sitting, so if it isn't by then, it would be early September. Even if it is in September, I fully expect government would still progress with the April 2028 deadline. It was the 28th of October last year that government made the decision in relation to Surrey for their implementation on the 1st of April 2027. So they may suggest there's still plenty of time for that decision. The difference is, however, we're looking at 21 council areas coming forward at the same time rather than just a single one in Surrey. So, yeah, if there's any questions, happy to take them, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Buckland. That was a lot of information for people to take in. I'll go around the table asking questions. I'll go first at Councillor Ballinger, Councillor Rolfe, Councillor Wall-Hoggins, and Councillor Rice. Beg your pardon. And
Thank you, David, for that information. It's a massive piece of work that's going to have to happen. Specifically, obviously, I know it's usual to akin the town and parish along with district, but obviously having the new formation. So thank you ahead of time to officers. But in what is the last point of contact from the government in relation to? I know you mentioned October for another council area, but what is the very last part? And sort of like, is there a time frame of where they go, this is a decision, and then this is when you're going to implement it?
Chair, at the moment, the government are committed to all the other tiers, the other tranches of local government reorganisation to come for the 1st of April 2028. The actual long stop date, I guess, would be in order to give sufficient time for the shadow council elections in May 2027, and therefore some point even post-Christmas could be feasible. I think you're building in a huge amount of risk, though, given what needs to happen. And we have got PricewaterhouseCoopers on as a delivery partner. That's been a joint appointment by all of the district boroughs and the county council. They have overseen LGR in places like North Yorkshire, Somerset and Cumbria. So there's experience there, but there's a lot to be done. And whilst we have started on the work, we're doing model neutral work at the moment, we're doing baselining. When you get the decision, it's whether or not you have to desegregate things like adult social care, children's services in a 2 unitary solution. That's a big deal and needs to meet the test of being what's called safe and legal by the time it goes live on the 1st of April. So the longer you delay on the decision, the more risk that you're building into the process, to be fair. But I think in theory it would be March, but in practice, if it got to that point, I'd fully expect it to be delayed until the 1st of April 2029 to give us sufficient time to do it properly.
Councillor Rolfe.
Thank you, Chair. David, you mentioned something about decision making from 50% of the county and 50% from the districts. How does that work with double hatters? So there could be double hatters, which changes the, if you like, the dynamics. So how strict are we going to be on that?
Okay. So government will lay out the rules of the makeup of the joint committee, and whilst our position is that there should be equal representation from each of the principal councils, I do believe it'll be 50% of the representation from the county, and then 50% from all of the other districts and boroughs combined. Now, for Warwickshire, the working principle would be that would mean 5 councillors from the county council and then 1 from each of the district and boroughs councils. Now, in that kind of scenario, I would fully expect it to be the leader of the council to be the representative on that joint committee. I think you're alluding to the fact that there might be a leader who's a leader at a district, a borough council and the county council. Can I pass that question, Kate? Because I simply don't know how that would work under that particular scenario.
Sorry, obviously it does change the dynamics and decision making. Somewhat.
Yeah, it's common to that. The arrangements of having 50-50 are common to what's happening in Surrey for the establishment of the 2 unitary councils there. But I genuinely don't know how to respond to the question, so I haven't got an answer.
Councillor Wall-Hoggins.
Yes, thank you. It's a couple of questions really, and it might be that Mesa will answer this question as well. But can you tell me then, is this council, as this is absolutely going ahead now, what have you been told about budget setting for this council for 27 to 28? I remember back in the early days that you thought there was going to be limitations on you know, spending any money, and when does that start? And also, clearly, the fabulous Mason Nash is going to be up against it, given the and his team are going to be up against it with regard to dealing with the elections in May 2027. So what provision are we going to make in order to make sure that Mesa and his team has an adequate team in order to move that forward in a nimble way? Because I'd rather it was flagged now so that we're aware, because this timescale, from my perspective, is unacceptable. Really, there's two. You know, I suppose you're preparing for each eventuality, but nevertheless, this is going to be some workload when it's announced. But the budget and how we're managing the
Okay,
electoral
Chair,
matters.
through you. So the council will be free to set its own budget for 27-28. There'll be no restrictions in place for the council to set its own budget in 2027-28. So when you meet as a council in February 2027, you can determine your budget for the coming year. There is something called a Section 24 direction that comes in place when the shadow council elections have been held, which does restrict the ability for an individual council to make a specific individual spending decision. And under the Section 24 directions which have happened in the past, that would limit the council to a capital spend of £1 million or a revenue decision, and this is a discrete revenue position, not all of our revenue, but one revenue decision of £100,000. Now, what happened in Cumbria, the last area to go through this, was those limits were found to be too restrictive, and the first meeting of the Shadow Council that met in Westmoreland and Furness and Cumberland increased those limits to £5 million on capital and £1 million on revenue, predominantly because of things such as SEN and social care type care packages, which themselves can be in excess of £100,000. So that, as we expect, the structural changes order will have those restrictions, but they won't come into place until May 2027. In February 2027, we do set our own budget.
So, in effect, so can you just explain to me, so you'll be setting the budget as normal, but yet the restrictions on that budget, whatever you set, is going to kick in once those elections have happened. Is that what you just said to us? Thank you.
That is what I just said to you, yes. So, but it will be for new spending decisions. So our refuse and recycling contract, that will continue as normal. We'll have new properties coming onto that. We have within the provision of the contract the requirement to fund new refuse trucks as and when we have population growth. That will be an assumption that we will have to take that kind of thing forward. So it shouldn't curtail the activities of the council too much. If we are already committed to schemes, they're okay as well. But it is new spending decisions, and as I say, there could be some flexibility that this new shadow council build into that as well. In relation to the elections, I think I've probably painted the worst case that Mesa doesn't get to find out until mid-March. We will have the draft for the structural changes order in the autumn of this year, and we then would fully expect that draft to become the full. There will be a period of negotiation with the government, as they've just started that now, on what that structural changes order will be, but we're not expecting the order to be finally, I don't know, I think it's made until probably mid-March. Now, that will give political parties an issue about candidates for all kinds of different elections. As far as resourcing the election, we have already a subgroup formed of the Law and Governance Working Group, which is looking at elections for that first cycle, and there's been some proposals coming around to support that as a process. One of the key benefits that we have that wasn't in place in Cumbria is that we all use the same electoral system across the piece. So that is a big bonus. And of course, we're quite used to running county-wide elections in 5 individual returning officers. So it would be akin to that, how we expect the elections to go ahead in May 2027.
Thank you for that comprehensive answer. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Chair. David, I'm going to ask you the question I ask you every time about strategic authority. A lot has been said in recent days about devolution. Has anything more been said in Stratford District about choice of strategic authority, and anything more been said about the possible timescales?
No, that's a excellent question. No, there's been no further progress. So if you recall, I think last time I mentioned that a joint letter had gone from the leader of the county and the 5 district boroughs asking for the ministers, McGovern and Farberhoon, to come up to the West Midlands to have a conversation with them about the difficulties of which strategic authority should there be. The response was they're not going to come, but we can have conversations with officials. I will say there's been no progress on that particular side, and you're right to highlight that the prospective new Prime Minister is very keen on devolution, and what we would not want to do is miss out on the prizes that might come along with that. In the absence of us, to be fair, Mike, sorry, Councillor Rice, as the discussions so far have been, is that it's difficult for us to foresee a strategic authority for Warwickshire that doesn't include Coventry, which is at the heart of Warwickshire. You've got major employers like Jaguar Land Rover with their headquarters in Coventry and their main R&D centre in Stratford. JLR would not want to be over 2 strategic authorities. So we had previously said that, yes, a strategic authority which included Coventry would be the preference. Now, that doesn't look likely, and therefore it could be, well, and then you get different scenarios. Sorry, if you've got a 2 unitary Warwickshire, that might lend itself to the south looking towards Herefordshire and Worcestershire, and the north looking towards Staffordshire, Leicestershire. Of course, Northamptonshire haven't got a partner for a strategic foundation authority either, so it could be looking that way. But that, I think, was not supported by any of the Warwickshire districts or the county that we should look towards Northamptonshire. Long answer, but we haven't got an answer to that strategic authority yet now.
Thank you for that. Another question.
Sorry, Chair. And I just wondered about timescale, because I genuinely don't know. Is that still completely up in the air?
Yeah, so the Mayor of the West Midlands Combined Authority did respond and said not that whilst they might consider it long term, not ahead of the next mayoral elections. And I'm desperately trying to recall when those elections are, but it would be sometime in 2030s before we would have a mayor covering this area. That would be my guess.
Thank you. Another question from the left wing, Councillor Keithley.
Thanks very much, Chair. I've got 2, if that's okay.
If you could keep them succinct.
They will be succinct, yeah. So the first question is really about staffing issues and the project, the delivery project. I had some experience with PwC myself on an ERP system 20 years ago, and it sucked a lot of staff in. Some staff were assigned. I'm interested to have some reassurance that we've got sufficient headroom with the staff that we have, not to put them under undue strain, and also that if people are assigned to the project, they've got some backfill so that the services continue to be provided to residents at the level that we'd expect.
Is that your
first question?
Thank you for that, Chair. And that will be the basis of the report that we bring back to the September cycle. But the Council has already provided £1 million for project management support for this, in excess of the £2 million to fund the actual implementation of the single or the 2 unitary solution. On that £1 million, we have appointed a project management officer of our own. So we have a gentleman starting with us on the 1st of September who used to be an employee of the LGA, very well connected, and very pleased to have him on board. In relation to the implementation coordination group, which has been formed, Julie Lewis is covering that on behalf of the council, and we have freed her up of some of her line management responsibilities as well. Now, the £1 million that we have provided will go towards supporting backfill in areas such as HR, legal, finance, to enable them to then concentrate more on the project. So that backfilling that you're talking about absolutely will be vital. PricewaterhouseCoopers are helping us with the development of implementations plans for each of the 6 work streams that have been established at the moment. We have work streams on assets, contracts, staff, ICT, finance, I wish I hadn't started the list, and another one. But there's 6 work streams which are currently being worked on. When we get the decision, there'll be another work stream established looking at service continuity to make sure when it comes to it, our ambition is that on the 1st of April 2028, actually nobody's impacted adversely by this effectively merger of 6 into 1 or 2.
Thank you. If you'd indulge me with a second short question.
Even succincter.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's good to hear, and I'm sure we're going to get some project updates along the way. The second question is a practical one about how committee structures work and committee meetings work when we've got a shadow authority as well as the existing legacy authorities.
Yeah, I might defer to Macer on this one, but the existing council will operate as normal, so it'll be business as normal until the 31st of March 2028, and that is a Friday. So we finish on a Friday, and then the new council will be formed on the 1st. The new council will meet very shortly after their elections, within the 3 weeks that they'll be required to do. They'll have to agree their new constitution. They'll have to elect the chair. They'll have to establish all of the committees that they will be working to, but they will be recommended to them by the joint committee. So the joint committee has a role to do ahead of the shadow council elections, but they will get going proper on the 1st of April 2028. So they won't have all of the committees that currently sit, but we can probably do a masterclass on that particular subject to give a bit more clarity.
Okay, thanks. That does help, because I was under the impression maybe the shadow authority was running in parallel, but it sounds like there's a cut-over point. So the legacy committees continue, and then the new authority takes over with the committee running.
Stratford District Council will continue to operate until the 31st of March 2028, and we will be absolutely responsible for the provision of services up until that particular point. The main work for the Shadow Council will be ensuring that the new authority or new authorities will be safe and legal to operate from the vesting date.
I think what you've drawn out is there's a difference between a body and the body's shadow. Councillor Crump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Keith has obviously been looking at my paperwork as well, because I was mentioning salaries as well. Slightly tangent on it, so I don't want to repeat it. Obviously, the additional £1 million has been put in.
Could you bring the microphone?
Yeah, Mr. Bear. The additional £1 million has been put in for LGR, which is sensible. No problems with that. Couple of things. In the outturn report on revenue, there was at least 7 areas that have problems, salary savings because of vacancies and unable to recruit. So it seems to be a general pattern, both here and in local government, that recruiting of staff is an issue. And we mentioned that regarding the performance at the last meeting. So it do seem inextricably linked. So I think it's a fair point. My point is that the £1 million, which is good, but sometimes putting throwing money at it doesn't necessarily achieve the options. You know, you could put a salary out for £100,000 for a job, but might not necessarily attract the person, because there's, as you say, 20 other local areas coming up at the same time who are probably in a similar position to ourselves, who are looking for staff who have some form of expertise. And like I say, you quite rightly say we're lucky to get somebody from an ex-LGA person with lots of contacts and networks. So that's very helpful. But I think we'd perhaps like some reassurance that officers who are left here are not being put under undue pressure to do their own work as well as the LGR. And how confident are we in attracting the right calibre and type of person to come and take this on in a meaningful and a proper way, so we get the best results for Warwickshire. So on the 1st of April 28, Warwickshire residents are not the April Fools that might happen. So,
If I can be well, it is a huge ask. We're building a new plane whilst we're currently in flight with our existing services, so it is a big undertaking. How we are resourcing the project would be mainly to backfill staff, to allow existing staff who have the knowledge of how Stratford-on-Avon District Council operates to then participate more fully in the project. We need our best on this to ensure that we're successful for this humongous task that we're facing. So if you've read the full of the revenue report for the Cabinet, there's a request for a further £750,000 worth of support on top of the million. We've already done some battle planning, and we think the million, whilst helpful, would not be sufficient, and therefore to ensure that it's properly resourced, there's a request to increase that to 1.75 million.
I think, Councillor Crump, your concern is well expressed and is noted, and I think Mr. Buckler nearly called you councillor then. Chief Executive is attuned to the challenge. A succinct time.
It's again this pressure under LGR aligned with section regulation 19, Safe Warwickshire Local Plan. It's putting a lot of pressure on staff. And I'm again concerned about pressure on the staff, concerned because they've not only got to do the job, but there's all sorts of recruitment processes to go through. So whilst you're doing those recruitment processes, you can't necessarily always devote your full time to other priorities as well. So there's lots of pressure, and I know you've put additional staff in HR, I think, to cope with that. I do listen sometimes, David. So again, it's just expressing concerns. There's lots of pressure and strains on the council, and you know, if they do need support from from councillors, and if we need to lobby cabinet for additional funds on your behalf, I think coming to ONS with capacity concerns, I think they would be well received.
Do you feel the need to respond to that?
No, I think that was a comment rather than a question.
Yes.
So I'll probably.
I agree with you, Councillor Worley-Hoggins.
Yes, quite by chance, I met the LGA officer who is joining here yesterday in Walsall, and I have to say that I've been struck from the get-go of the high calibre of this person, and frankly, we're lucky to have him, all right, as part of the team. So I'm very reassured about the recruitment of people helping. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Worley-Hoggins. I wouldn't have expected Mr. Buckland to accept second best at any stage. Are we done with questions to Mr. Buckland? Thank you very much for your attendance and for the fullness of your information. Very, very helpful. Thank you. We move on. Item 7, Cabinet meeting next time round. I'm going to change the order with which we deal with these 4 items. Notice of motion funding for warm hubs I'm going to bring forward to number 1 and then carry on as listed. Is somebody going to introduce this paper or talk to it?
Yes, I can do that if that would be helpful, Chair. The paper responds to a notice of motion that was raised regarding the concern about the continuation of warm hubs following the demise of the Warwickshire Rural Community Council. The paper broadly sort of acknowledges the issues that the motion raises, and it suggests that we will sort of take them forward as part of the we're tasking the head of sort of housing, revenues and customer services and her team to sort of work out the sort of impact of that and put together a series of proposals for how we might sort of close any gaps that are identified as part of the sort of budget process going forward. And then in the interim, it is suggested that we sort of make a small budget of £25,000 available, effectively, if you'll excuse my colloquialism, to sort of plug gaps where organisations that may be part of the future solution have got short-term bills, to make sure we don't lose any of our partners sort of going forward, who may be part of the solution going forward in the interim for the sake of cash flow. So in essence, that's what the report is suggesting by way of introduction. Feel free to debate.
Thank you very much. Now, I know that one of the joint sponsors of the motion, Councillor Shenton, would like to speak, and I'm going to use my chairman's prerogative and allow him to speak. And I think that would be better that we had his contribution at the beginning of our discussion rather than at the end. So, Councillor Shenton, would you like to come forward, please?
If you can bear with us, we just get Councillor Shenton set up on the mic. We're on our way.
Councillor Shenton, I'd like to compliment you on your reputation for being succinct, brief, and to the point.
I'll try and be very succinct. I take that. I take the point. This paper, one of the reasons I wanted to speak was that this paper has been produced. Nobody has consulted me about the content of this paper, or even Bill Fleming. If they had done so, we would have responded to some of the points that were made in the paper. One of the issues is the paper talks about heating oil syndicates, about Meals on Wheels, etc., etc., etc. The motion itself is very specific, only about warm hubs. Nothing else. There is no suggestion that we're going to get involved in any of that other stuff. Partly because Meals on Wheels in itself is an expensive issue, needs specialist help for that. So the report has a lot of detail about all these other issues. That is nothing to do with the motion that we put forward. The motion that we put forward, it was asking for £50,000 funding. The cost to this authority would have been £50,000 for funding. No admin costs involved at all, because we would set up the CIC. The report also says that there is a great possibility that the CIC and our backers would fail. Our backer is Cadent, the largest infrastructure company in this country. They have a network. They will provide funding, ongoing funding. We were asking for funding for 1 year, and they would match it. Beyond that, there would be no cost to the council taxpayer. This paper talks about funding for the next 5 years, and that's 225,000, and that's without the cost of Nick Cadd and his team, or Hannah's team, being involved on top of that. So the cost will be significant to the council taxpayer with the proposal that's in the paper. The report suggests that, as I say, that CIC would fail, but Cadent, we've met with Cadent, Bill Fleming, Councillor Fleming and myself, we've met with Cadent. Cadent are happy to progress this with us, and Cadent are going to supply all the legal support, and all the ongoing training, which includes safeguarding, and that will be part of their social responsibility that's mandated by the government. Again, no cost to the taxpayer. It's purely through Cadent. The report, if the report writer or the report states that they've been to a number of warm hubs, nobody came to my warm hub. Now, I'm one of the sponsors of this. Nobody came to talk to me. I have had no conversation about this report, because if I had, I would have asked for certain sections to be removed because they were superfluous. I would have also pointed out that if they think that the CIC will fail, then it means that Cadent themselves would fail, because they're putting the money into this. Cadent have learnt from dealing with WRCC that they need to ring fence, make sure that funds are better ring fenced and not used to support other services such as Meals on Wheels, etc. So Cadent are very clear about how they want this to run. They are very happy that Councillor Fleming and myself are proposing what they call a one-to-many model. So CIC, Cadent fund the CIC, we talk to the warm hubs, we make sure they're accredited. Now, Councillor Fleming's warm hub and my warm hub are accredited, and they are listed on the websites as an accredited warm hub. We would, using obviously specialists and staff which are funded by Cadent, we would then determine how that funding to the warm hubs would happen. We would have to check that they're accredited, that they're formed correctly. There is nothing that SDC would need to get involved in. We're very specific in the motion on notice. It was a one-off contribution. Now, as it stands, because Cadent want to deal with us, we don't need that funding. It would be nice to have the additional startup funding and to say to Cadent, well, the local authority backs us, but Cadent are happy to go ahead.
Fine.
I would suggest that the report is not giving you the true picture.
Thank you,
I'll stop it there.
Thank you, Councillor Shenton. So your comment is basically that the motion sought a one-off contribution of £50,000, and that the proposal that is before the Cabinet to be recommended to the Council doesn't actually say £50,000 as a one-off. It says something different and something more extensive. I'm sure that Cabinet members who are here have heard that and will take that into account. Fine. Can we now move on to our discussion of this paper? Is there any advice or have you any questions of the officer that you might want answering? And do you have any comment about the proposals themselves? Councillor Rice.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. At this stage, I'm not sure. I've got a number of questions prepared, but in light of what Councillor Shenton has just said, I'm not sure whether I'm asking questions about the paper or I'm asking questions about warm hubs.
How would you like to proceed?
Over to you.
Well, if your questions are relevant to the recommendations that the Cabinet is being asked to propose to the Council, then fire away.
Okay.
Leg number 4 of the recommendations deals specifically with warm hubs. So if you've got something to say about warm hubs, then feel free.
Thank you, Chair. Well, one of my questions wasn't about warm hubs. It was actually the role of the rural housing enabler. But I assume now that that is not appropriate.
No. The paper is the paper.
Okay.
And those are the recommendations which are going to go to the Council if Cabinet approve them. If you think there are good reasons, or if you've got something to say which would aid the decision making of the Cabinet in relation to anything that's recommended, that is legitimate. So feel free.
Okay. I would like somebody to explain exactly what the sentence "the Council has subsequently recruited a similar role," that is a rural housing enabler, into the Council's planning policy team on top of page 22. What exactly does that mean? Is that a role? Is that a new person, or is that an existing person with additional responsibilities? I suppose is my question with that. But I also have a fundamental question. It's not clear to me from the paper how many of these warm hubs are actually in Stratford district. It could be 43 in Warwickshire and only 27 of those in Stratford, but it doesn't specifically say that. So I would be interested to know what the extent of the problem is, given that only 10 warm hubs responded to the officer who wrote the report.
Let me ask Mr. Perks if he'll deal with the first question. I don't know if he can't answer the second question on the split. I wonder whether Councillor Shenton knows that information. A nod, so I'll turn to him later. Mr. Perks.
I'm grateful for that, Councillor Shenton, because I didn't know the answer to the second question, but I do know the answer to the first question. That following the demise of the WRCC, we decided to take that role in-house. We have recruited a new person who's due to start with us in the next couple of weeks to take on the role that we used to contract to WRCC. So that function will be provided by a permanent member of staff within Stratford District Council's establishment who will sit in the planning policy team.
Councillor Shenton, would you like to come back to the table and provide the answer, if you know it?
Very quickly, the 43 does refer to Warwickshire. Those are the known warm hubs. On top of those, you've got libraries and fire stations as well. But 43 is purely Warwickshire. In terms of Stratford, I don't know at this point how many there are because not that many were accredited. They often run without being accredited. So I don't know. I don't have the final answer to that, how many in Stratford, but our view was that with the initial funding, that would be restricted to Stratford district, not to Warwickshire. But we would always intended to go to Caden to get the wider, the wider funding for Warwickshire.
Thank you for that. Councillor Warwick-Hoggins.
Yes, I'm assuming that I can still speak about this matter because it mentions oil syndicates here. That's in this paper.
Off the cuff, I would have said I don't know your interest. It's up for you to decide how close your relationship with the oil industry actually is and whether that's relevant. If you want to declare an interest, I'm sure Mr. Nash will have a view about that.
Well, I'm going to have to declare an interest that my husband's company does deliver oil via oil syndicates across the district and wider. Notwithstanding that, I still have comments to make unrelated to that.
Can I just check with Mr. Nash? Unrelated, carry on.
I am somewhat aghast that the proposal the notice of motion asked for £50,000 to bolster and to maintain warm hubs across the Stratford district. We then have before us a paper that in effect wants us to do way more, or wants to do way more, cover way more for half the price. And actually that's quite relevant because at the very beginning of this meeting we were talking about how poverty is affecting our residents. So I'm sorry, but I don't think that this paper is doing what we wanted it to set out. I also think because of the dilution in it, we're actually going to very strongly feel that we're actually going to let down the people that really need those warm hubs. And I'll go so far as to say this: surely the people that propose a notice of motion, who are the experts, who actually run, organise and have set up warm hubs, should be part of doing some of the work with us and should have some sort of consultation or be part of the consultation process.
So I'm trying to relate what you've just said to the decision that the Cabinet have to make about this particular set of recommendations. Do you have a question that you would put to the Cabinet?
I would put to the Cabinet why they've put the figure at 20, half the figure that was requested, and even at 50,000, it was a very low amount. It's not as if we're not swimming with cash, as we'll look at later on in the budget outturns, etc. So my question to Cabinet is it appropriate? I thought I was fairly explicit about it. Is it appropriate to have halved the request in order to fulfil our obligations for the warm hub? And we know anecdotally that the demand on that is likely to be higher. And not only that, then increase the scope of the notice of motion to include more for less. Thank you.
Thank you. I will happily reflect back to the Cabinet when I meet them next week that there is a discrepancy between what was sought and what is proposed to be provided, which I think is the essence of what you're saying.
If I could. The way I'm reading, certainly the way we intended the recommendations to Council to be read, was that the 25,000 isn't a once and for all settlement. The 25,000 is like a cash flow measure to keep things going, as I said in my introduction, so that the sort of holistic role of the loss of Warwickshire Rural Community Council be considered as part of the budget process. And there may be a lot more money released through that process, but we need to sort of put a coherent picture together, which was, at the risk of opening old wounds, part of the reason why we were suggesting like a task and finish group to look how we supported sort of vulnerable people who need help at this time would be useful to inform the budget process, so we've got a long-term sustainable joined up solution going forward. Now, I realise that's landed badly, but that was the intention. But it certainly isn't. I wouldn't want the committee to feel that we decided that we were asked for 50,000, we're offering 25,000, that's the end of it, because I don't think that is how the recommendation is worded.
Thank you. The essence is, however, despite the willingness to be more generous, as the paper proposes, that is not what was asked for. I'm going to go to Councillor Littlewood now, as he hasn't had an opportunity to speak so far. I'm going to go to Councillor Littlewood.
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of repeating, but it's really clarification. My impression of this report is that it is far and way and above the scope that was requested within the motion. And picking up on the point you just made, Mr. Perks just made, with regards to ensuring a service is provided in as soon as possible with regards to warm hubs, the overburden of the three other services that are being considered in here and been financially reported actually could slow that down. I think that there should be two papers. I think there should be a paper that considers only the warm hubs, which have been effectively financed previously with agreement with Cadent, but we need the starting 50,000, not the 225,000 over 4 years that's in the report. There should be a separate report for the other services, and when it comes to Meals on Wheels, that is a considerable commitment on capital. So my point is, and I know you're going to ask me what it is, my point is that deep concern should be passed to Cabinet on the appropriateness of the scope of this report, and that it should be considered as two separate items into the future, and that a fast track mechanism be sought for the warm hub financing deal, which is clearly already being put in place by the proposers with Cadent and needs to be agreed with this council. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. Councillor Rolfe.
It was interesting to hear what Councillor Shenton had to say about accredited warm hubs. It clearly indicates that there are many warm hubs out there that just don't call themselves warm hubs. That's what concerns me. How do you get accredited? Do you have to be named as a warm hub, or are you just exactly like, you know, the fire station and some of the churches are just providing exactly the same service? Will they benefit from this, or is it just those warm hubs that are accredited? Because it seems a little unfair. In order to get money, do you have to become a warm hub?
I'm not going to ask Councillor Shenton to answer that question, because I think that's a question that members of the Cabinet will have to answer for themselves, and they'll take advice in the meantime. I got Councillor Rice first, then I'll come to Councillor Crump.
Thank you, Chair. And I just would like to test my understanding of what Mr. Perks just said. And my impression from this report is that the recommendation is to lose the £50,000 funding from Cadent and to make do with what we can put together, at least in the meantime. The recommendations appear to reject £50,000 of funding from Cadent because my understanding is that to achieve that funding, a new community interest company would have to be formed, and that would be both expensive, tedious, and would have to be staffed, etc., etc., etc. So, are the recommendations that the £50,000 from Cadent, funding from Cadent, should not be pursued?
Are you in a position to answer that question?
No.
That's a question clearly that the Cabinet, when they consider this matter, will need to answer. or have the information available so they can decide how they want to proceed. On that basis, Councillor Crump, you had asked.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think my point adds on to that because there's quite a bit of information. Sorry, quite a bit. There is some information, I will be more precise, that seems to be missing from the report. We don't know, as Councillor Rolfe says, I was listening, Kate, we don't know the difference between accredited and non-accredited warm hubs and how they would benefit from this. We've had Mr. Councillor Shanton, who was the sponsor of this, co-sponsor of this, who's done a lot of work, and you acknowledged that by allowing him to speak. And he's got grave concerns about what's been asked of this and the expansion of the original notice of motion. So I think the report is lacking. I think I agree with Councillor Littlewood that it does need to be broken into two, specifically warm hubs. We concentrate on those, and then how do we concentrate in the second report on the response to the demise of WRCC? And I think you said, and Mr. Perks says, that could have been something as part of the task and finish group. And again, I agree with that. I don't think that was an unreasonable point. So I've got concerns that this report is lacking in information. It hasn't spoken to the sponsor of the, or spoke very little to the sponsor of this notice of motion, who's an expert. It has spoken to very few people as far as I can see, and it's not taken into account what Cadent is offering and what they're providing as part of their social responsibility package to the local residents. So this paper's got more questions than answers at the moment, so I can't really support going to Cabinet in its same shape and form. Thank you.
Fine. I'm going to call a halt then. I'll summarise. I haven't heard any discussion on items 1 to 3, so I presume that members of the OSC are content with those. Item 4, however, on warm hubs, the essential criticism seems to be that what the paper answers is not the question that was asked, and that the paper doesn't answer the question, can I have £50,000? It says you can have a stream of money, but it's not £50,000 in the first year, and it goes on to make deal with other matters which are complications as far as the proposers of the motion were concerned. There's questions about what is a warm hub, what's an accredited warm hub, how many are in the district, etc. I think these are all questions that are totally relevant, totally consistent with people's views, and they are matters that the Cabinet will have to decide upon, whether they feel they've got the right information in front of them to be able to make this particular leg of this particular set of recommendations work. That's for them to decide. I am happy to represent the views of the committee on that basis. On that basis, we can move on to the second matter to deal that comes under the Cabinet's purview next time round, which is the task and finish group to do with public open spaces, etc. Do we have an officer to say a few words? Can I just say that while we're waiting for Mr. Buckland to find his voice, that I presume that since this item is the product essentially of matters which have come before OSC previously, that I was going to say that we can look forward to a safe passage for this particular item, but this committee is full of surprises.
If I may, thank you very much. And I think in your introduction there, you hit the nail on the head. This was a suite of recommendations that came through the Task and Finish group to the Review and Scrutiny Committee. Given that there are some resource requirements in relation to those recommendations, the normal route would then be that they go to the Cabinet for consideration, and that's what this report is, before they are then referred to full council for determination. So that's what this report is endeavouring to do. It's responding to each of the recommendations, the remaining 9 recommendations, that is, because there was 10 originally that came forward from the committee. The first one was to write to the Secretary of State, and that was to help influence the review that government has been undertaking in relation to reducing the prevalence of private estate management arrangements. The council has written, and that has been received by government, and hopefully will be reflected in their response to that particular issue when we get, well, indeed, when we do get the response. So on the remaining 9 recommendations, they are supported, and the paper talks about how practically they can be implemented by the council. So I think that's the headlines, that the 9 recommendations that were left are supported. There's obviously very little we can do historically about particular arrangements. A lot of this is looking forward. And there is also a recommendation about the future funding of the team, which has been put together, which is doing an excellent job at the moment, but they're on temporary resources. That will be funded as part, or they'll be considered as part of the 2027-28 budget that we discussed earlier. The council will have full discretion on how it allocates resources for that particular year. So, Chair, I mean, I wasn't going to go through individually unless that's required, but happy to take any questions.
I think members of the committee are as familiar with the content of this particular paper as perhaps you are. Can I just call upon Councillor Johnson as chairman of the Task and Finish group, who might want to say a few words?
I welcome this report, and I welcome the support to the recommendations of the Task and Finish group. There always was a slight spillover. This agenda was really quite difficult to manage because there's always a spillover between the task of the Task and Finish group and our wish to encourage parish councils under Part L to take on the management of public open space. And that wasn't part of our agenda, but it was certainly raised quite often. And I do, as I said, welcome the support this received. I've got a particular question on 1.10.2 on page 12, and I wonder if you could say a few more words about the technology required, because I don't know what the uniform software system is, or maybe Mr. Nelson can help.
I've looked over my shoulder twice at Graham, and he was looking at his papers. But Chair, with your consent, could we bring Graham to the table to respond to that question?
I'm sure that would be exceedingly helpful if he did.
Thank you very much. As David has just so gently pointed out to me, the specific question that you've raised through some paragraphs a bit of text I put into the emerging report that just reflects some of the progress that we've been making with the resources that, again, David referred to. And so one of the things that we've looked at putting in place is a process to allow us to better monitor conditions and legal agreements. The uniform system is the back office system by which we manage planning matters. So it's a system that allows us to flag up the requirements of particular high risk, what you might, selective conditions, such as those requiring open space to be completed by a certain stage in the process, so that we've got a back office system to prompt officers to ask particular questions linked to the monitoring that we do from when development goes ahead. And the purpose of that isn't necessarily to make it easier to deal with historic things that we're currently dealing with at the moment, but it's hopefully to minimise the prospects of some of the problems that we've had arising from historic matters being replicated for future applications which we are dealing with at the moment, because as all members will be aware, we have a significant number of further planning applications we're dealing with for residential development, which may end up with similar private management companies in place, and ensuring that developers fully comply with all the legal requirements that will be placed on those permissions, and then management companies do what they need to do, will be important to deliver. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I'd just like to get a feel of whether we see the resource implications as being manageable within the budget setting process, or is it going to be something we can't afford to do?
Can I just say, I don't think we need an answer to that question. That's an operational decision, a set of problems that managers will have to deal with. The question before us is, do we support the recommendations put forward by the paper and to be recommended to council? And I think, given that this body was the instigator of the content of the paper, and that the cabinet is the paper is supportive of all 9 recommendations, I think we're in a position to simply endorse. We do support. That's the view of the committee, and we can pass on to the next item. Unless somebody violently objects to that, I think that's the way we should proceed. That's the way we will proceed. Thank you. You just squeezed in.
No, it's just a very quick one. And on that basis, I assume that the paper, the further report that is to be prepared for consideration by the Cabinet on the financial implications for next year's budget will come before this committee later this year. Top of page 14.
It's in the recommendation, the second recommendation on page 1. It'll be incorporated in the revenue budget considerations, and that naturally will come to us as part of the budget preparation process. So the answer is yes. On that basis, then, I'm going to pass on to the third item on the Cabinet agenda that we want to consider, and that's the SIL paper. Again, do we have an officer who can give us a brief introduction about the do's and don'ts, so to speak? Graham Nelson, well done.
By strange coincidence, yes, it's still down to me, and the officer who wrote the detail of this paper will join us just in case any members have any questions for him. He's on his way down, but just to give you the brief overview of what the purpose of the paper is, it's effectively an annual process that we go through to identify and then allocate the community infrastructure levy that we hold to projects. We do that effectively through a discursive process where we go out to various community bodies, particularly in those areas that have faced the highest levels of growth pressures arising from there, explore with them what their infrastructure requirements are, and effectively produce a long list, which is the purpose of the report that's for Cabinet, to get that long list of potential funding things to be endorsed for us to take forward, to give confidence for the applicants, potential applicants, to invest in the time to pull all the questions together to demonstrate that it's properly funded. That's the first and main thing about the report. There are 2 other matters that it covers, and one is quite a minor technical change arising, which we're seeking Cabinet's endorsement to change some of the questions that we ask ourselves when deciding whether to approve or not, and that comes from learning that we came about through last year. And the final change that we're suggesting in the report is we're seeking to change the timing of the process. Last year you considered, Cabinet considered the award of fundings in November of the year. There's a mixture of reasons why we're suggesting that the timing be put back to March next year. Some of that relates to the pressures of work that the team are suffering from in terms of preparing the South Warwickshire local plan, and also due to the need to review ultimately the community infrastructure levy, but actually it's also relevant to note some of the Chief Executive's comments about the likely timing moving with local government reorganisation, and frankly a desire to have the maximum flexibility and choice available and have the maximum amount of money to be allocated before that decision to allocate to particular projects might need to go to through a separate process when shadow authorities come into play. So those are the 3 recommendations that the report gets, which I hope gives you a sort of brief overview.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pull rank, so to speak, and ask a question myself. Just contextually, am I right in thinking that the amount of SIL money which is available is of the order of £5 million? That's factual question number 1. And factual question number 2 is, I went through the appendices and totted up how much is in the request list, and I totaled it to be just under £29 million, together with 12 particular requests which there wasn't a figure for. So it's going to be in excess of £29 million. And I know that that £29 million is heavily weighted on the basis of proposal for 2 schools. But nevertheless, I'm left still with the impression that you're trying to do a Cadbury's. You're trying to get a quart out of a pint pot. Is that a fair reflection? Which then begs the question, are we casting the net too wide in seeking requests? Because given the amount of SIL money that is available and likely to be available, there's never a chance that these projects are going to be funded. Is that a fair impression to have?
Thank you. Yeah, I think you. Sorry, I came a little bit. Is that okay? Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I came down a little bit late. I was just listening upstairs, but the last item before this one went very quick. Yeah, so we've moved to a process of inviting applications, but there isn't a sort of there's no kind of sort of filter, because it would be very hard to apply a filter in terms of the amount of money that we've got available. I don't think it's going to be 5 million; it'll be less than that. There are huge challenges around infrastructure needs, really, and this is like an interim process that we introduced a year ago. Once we've got the South Warwickshire local plan in place, with an infrastructure delivery schedule tied to that, we can start to plan in terms of how we're going to utilise Section 106 and SIL on specific projects. At the moment, this is a bit of a sort of, it's an interim approach. We've moved away from having an open door where anyone could apply to one where it's still selective, but I recognise we are still, there's more there than we can provide. I haven't got a solution as to how we filter things through. So some authorities on submittance of SIL say first come first serve, which that seems very very arbitrary. That there's no perfect solution, and we recognise the issues you've raised.
I'm just concerned that officers are doing a lot of work in evaluating and so on, and but it's never going to hit the fan, so to speak. It's never going to be productive. But anyway, by the by, I understand you understand the issue here. Are there other councillors? Councillor Warwick-Hoggins, in fact, I think Councillor Rolfe was first. Councillor Rolfe, then I'll come to Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I hope I'm not too late, and I have been corresponding with Sean Nicholson. There seems to be what's the word I'm trying to use? Some officers say I can't add, but some councillors say I can add. I'd like to ask the officers to consider adding before Cabinet on Monday a project for the Stratford Football Club, which is a contribution towards the 3G pitch. I can get the chairman to contact Sean to just give some context around it, but I would like that to be considered and put on the list. Thank you.
Thanks for the identification of that project. It matter for officers where procedurally it's possible or not, given the papers have already been prepared. But that's with you as officers. Councillor Worley-Hoggins.
Yes, we often see the SIL reports coming before us, and over the years, there's been different manifestations of them. I'd like to bring your attention, please, to page 44. With regards to what is now termed as the new GP practice on the current Ellen Badger Hospital site in Shipston Stour and the Health and Wellbeing Facility. There's been a massive change in the wording describing what's going on at the Ellen Badger, and I've got other councillors on this committee who are very well versed in it, and you will all remember and recall that we actually went on a site visit to the Ellen Badger. There isn't a new GP practice at the Ellen Badger. The current and only GP practice in Shipston has rented rooms there as an overspill, currently while they're having new works undertaken, and to now refer to the hospital as a health and wellbeing facility, which repairs bicycles, I think is a little bit, I'm not happy with the way that this has been worded and the way that the words have been changed. It does not reflect what the original SIL money was supposed to be used for. I think there are many councillors across political parties would agree with me that the situation at the Ellen Badger and what the money's been spent on versus what was expected to be built and provided is still significantly wide of the mark and why the SIL money was allocated. And to say it's been completed, they may well have spent the money, but it certainly hasn't provided what we were expected to when the original application was put forward. Furthermore, one of the key questions that we've been saying is, how is the money? How do we check that the SIL money is being spent as it should? And we just seem to me that we take it in good faith, really. But I am still deeply unhappy about the amount of money that's been spent there, and for the outcomes that nobody particularly wanted.
Okay. Can I just say that is a particular point of view, and I don't want to debate the issues about the Ellen Badger Hospital in terms of facilities provided or not. But what I do think is accurate to say is that the money that was allocated from SIL to the Ellen Badger Hospital project was done so under a legal agreement, and the terms of that legal agreement, as far as I'm aware, have been complied with. Is that not a factual statement of truth?
Yes, I think I take the point about the description. There was no sort of agenda there. We can amend that, and just on the point as well about how do we check. That's outside my remit, but there is an officer who's charged with following up on Section 106 payments and spend, and following up on SIL payments and spend as well.
And in fairness, I should say that Councillor Worley-Hoggins is right to point out that the GP facilities now evident in the Ellen Badger Hospital are not of a new practice. It's an existing practice which has taken space in that particular building, which is true. Councillor Ballinger. Oh,
I just come back on the point of principle that Councillor Worley-Hoggins raises.
Sure.
Around the purpose of those lists that are brought forward within this report is just to update on what's been taken off the list as potential candidates, essentially because it's been delivered. The time to scrutinise whether the the funding has been spent appropriately and has delivered accordingly for what its purpose of allocation for is one of the further reports that you will get later in the year through Cabinet. We have a statutory duty to report how the money has been spent, which we do through a document called an infrastructure funding statement, an IFS. I'm thinking whether that's finance or funding, but it's coming forward. It's on the Cabinet forward agenda, I think, for November. That's the time to scrutinise the efficacy of spend.
Councillor Ballinger.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, go through the report. There's lots of, the positives are there's lots of wonderful things that have been completed. Like me, and I drive through Wixford quite regularly, and there's a new village hall that is supporting the local village. But where we go on to proposed projects, I just want to highlight in terms of the.
Is this in the form of a question to the Cabinet? Or are you just making a statement about...
I'm going to ask a question now, Chair, but I just wanted to make an observation.
It's the question I'm interested in.
Yeah. So in terms of the proposed to be added to the infrastructure list, in terms of the top one on page 50, faces for all CIC, obviously that is within my ward, but I don't think the actual description highlights the project itself. And I just want to know if I could just make that clear, Chair.
I think that's something you could deal with offline, outside the meeting, if you feel the description needs improvement. I'm sure the officers will be alert to that and will receive it as you intend.
Might just make a couple of points for the committee around what the project is.
Oh, my point would be, for what purpose? This is we're here to scrutinise, not to just express points of view and pass comments. So if it's germane to the purpose of the committee, that's fine.
Okay, I'll pick up afterwards, Chair. But I thought I was, highlighting the wording is scrutinising. But I will pick up afterwards if that's what your wishes are.
If you're happy with that, I'm happy with that. Yeah. Fine. Councillor Johnson.
I think you're going to say the same thing about me. There are 3 natural flood management schemes on the list to be retained. One was also agreed in 2025 on the River Dean, which doesn't seem to be in. The ones on the Arrow and the Stour are in, but not the Dean.
I'm sure officers will have taken note of your concern and will respond to you outside the meeting. Councillor Crump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, there's quite a few points here. Again, I agree with you about expectations. You have £29 million worth of potential items in here, and £5 million plus. I think I agree that we need to have as much information as possible, but sometimes I think we've got too much in here, and we've got to manage expectations, be realistic about what's going to go through and the timescales, because there's quite a bit of TBC in terms of cost, TBC in terms of sill sort, TBC in terms of when it's going to happen. So I think whether they could be filtered out, or whether a report could be done that, well, these are likely to happen. These are likely to happen, but in a certain period, providing we find, and these are on the wish list to happen. So I think that would potentially be helpful. Whether they could do some triage to do something like that. Table 1 on page 43, it would be good to know the reasons why the projects were removed from the infrastructure list. Natural flood management scheme, money no longer needed and returned to the pot. Well, that's good, because the money's coming back to the pot, but why wasn't it needed? Could that have been triaged before it came to for the request? So I think there's things like that. Again, can we filter them out? I take on the points about precise language in the infrastructure, because we've had the examples particularly around the Allen Badger. So I think whether we can be more precise in terms of infrastructure funding language we use. And there's also, there's things in here in the future, there's some in my area, that it was to do with water and natural flood and water management, etc. And I just wonder whether these are going to be linked to the South Warwickshire local plan, because they're making assumptions on things as the status quo. But for example, if we're having 3,200 houses in and around Southam, the flood patterns, etc., the water levels, Severn Trent, etc., etc. And I'm a meeting with Mr. Nicholson and Severn Trent next week to discuss these issues. Whether those are being taken into account for future. So, is there some synergy, cross-working between the two? Because whilst some of these infrastructure bids might have been appropriate in a few when they first went in, they might be subject to change in light of changes brought in due to South Warwickshire local plan. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before I ask the officer to comment, I'm sure that the officers are not in favour of listing TBCs all over the place. They would want to provide as much information as possible so that we're as informed as possible. The question of well, my basic reaction to your point is that these guys have got an impossible job. They and I don't know the question of the migration of the allocation, the basis for allocation from open bids to prioritise and whatever. I wonder, to take your point about the South Warwickshire local plan, whether if you've only got £5 million, whether the authority doesn't actually take a more directive approach and says we assess where infrastructure needs really are, and given our limited resources, we think the greatest effect will be to spend it in X, Y, and Z. That's a policy matter. That's for the cabinet to consider, not for. But the suggestion is there implicit in what you've said.
I think it's, again, there's two things, the points I agree with you on. Is one, I agree the officer's got a difficult task on this. So therefore, can we suggest ways to make it easier and therefore use both the officer time and the money as efficiently as possible? And secondly, about the South Warwickshire local plan, that I agree whether that could be helpful as well. So I think whilst we're trying to say that we need to use officer time and SIL money as efficiently, as effective as possible. And are there any lessons learned from the ones that have been returned, where the SIL money has been returned back to the SIL fund, that we can do in the future? So therefore, we won't have to go down those routes, come up with a scheme, and then that scheme doesn't go ahead. So just some reviews, really.
I think what we're trying to do is be helpful. It might seem we're being critical, but actually we're trying to be as helpful to minimise your workload and make your time spent as effective as possible. I don't know whether you want to comment.
I think I totally agree with the point that, you know, we will be, once we've got the South Warwickshire local plan to a certain status, we will be able to be directive insofar as, you know, we're having conversations with the various infrastructure providers. They're giving us their wish list. It's a huge list again, but we'll be in a position to sort of direct things. At the moment, we're in this sort of a limbo where we're just using. We're trying to introduce a system that has got a bit more structure to it than just inviting everyone to apply for SIL, basically. The point around funds being returned or projects not developing, I think it's very much, I agree, if there are lessons to be learned, we need to do that. My experience from last year, just having discussions with the projects that came onto the list, you know, some of those were quite detailed discussions, and it transpired that it was almost helpful to the people who were applying for SIL, because it made them think about where they were with the project as well. So some of them, you know, hopefully we've retained on the list, and hopefully they have advanced. So and the point about compliance with the SWLP, I think that's a really good point. What we don't want to be doing is funding a flood attenuation scheme on a site that's going to be developed as a sort of, which I don't think would happen, but we'll certainly bear that, have that in mind in terms of longevity of the projects.
Could the officer note that Councillor Crump made a good point on about the South Rockshire Local Plan, please, Angus?
And you can have 3 gold stars. Final remark or contribution from Sarah Whaley-Hoggins?
Worley-Hoggins.
Beg your pardon.
Thank you. Some questions that I have. So the South Western Relief Road and Stratford-Honeybourne rail link are now excluded from the list because there will not be sufficient to support them at this time. So does this council have any funding plan for these at all? And my next question is a little bit of a follow-on from what Councillor Crump was asking is, given the South Warwickshire local plan is still progressing, how much of this infrastructure list is provisional and likely to be rewritten when and if the plan and its housing numbers is finalised? And is that a sensible use of officer time now? Thank you.
Just on the first point, then I think when we produced the original report looking at the new system, we were sort of, I think members asked us to include a reference to the South Western Relief Road and Honeybourne, because otherwise the question would be asked, well, why aren't you funding those projects? We are, with the Relief Road, we are looking at alternative funding sources, both in terms of the role of development, but also external sources, and similarly with Honeybourne as well. That's wrapped up in wider work around the future of rail infrastructure in the wider sub area, which again we are looking at. So that's like a legacy thing that we kept from a previous report. Just to provide context. The second point around, is this list going to be out of date? I think they're all good projects. To some extent, we're sort of backfilling in terms of helping to address impacts that have happened with the core strategy and development associated with the core strategy. Hence, we're focusing on the settlements that we are. So my feeling is that all of these projects will be valid in once they've been funded. They'll be making a contribution in the longer term.
On that basis, I'm going to conclude the discussion of this item in relation to the 3 recommendations. I think generally there is support for those. I think we recognise the difficulty that officers have, and they struggle to get information, and they have lots of people to deal with in order to come up with this list, and they do the best they possibly can, but they face an impossible task of getting a quart out of a pint pot. On that basis, I'm going to turn now to the last remaining item under the Cabinet items, which is the end-of-year report, so to speak, on the finances. And can I say that at the pre-meeting we held, this item was not on the agenda. There is the systematic paper test that's applied, and this item was not chosen. I thought that my view was that even if it's only nominal, that it's quite important that OSC has an opportunity to review financial figures for the year as a whole, even if only to go through the motions. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should do, just go through the motions, but the committee has reviewed these numbers piecemeal, so to speak, as we've gone along during the year. So there should be nothing new or fresh here in any great detail, but I did think that it was important that you had an opportunity to review finances for the year as a whole, and if you've got any strategic issues or points you wish to make, I'd be glad to hear them. So, Councillor Worley-Hoggins had her hand up first, then I'll come to Councillor Littlewood.
Yeah, we've been sitting in this meeting for nearly 2 hours now without a comfort break, and I'm actually requesting that we have a brief adjournment so that before we cover the last matter, so that we can make ourselves comfortable, please.
If that's your wish, 5-minute break. Thank you. We have 2 papers to deal with, to consider, one dealing with capital, one dealing with revenue outturns for the year. I don't have any particular structure to the discussion. I don't have, well, there are points I could make, but I'll only make them if nobody else, if somebody else makes them, I will keep my counsel to myself. So, I think Councillor Littlewood was keen to talk.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at table 1 on page 176 of the revenue outturn predictions. I'm not questioning any of the numbers, but this report highlights a strategic concern, in my opinion. A very large number of favourable positions comes out of underspend on salaries, and that suggests to me that we are not filling the posts that are required for this council to do its job in an efficient and manner, and especially as the upcoming work on local government reform and on the change of planning rules that are coming through in the future, probably, and also the South Warwickshire local plan. So, look, my question, I don't suppose there's anybody here, perhaps Mr. Perks could answer it in general for me, please, but it is of concern. I'm sure it's under control, but I'd like to be reassured. Thank you.
Councillor Littlewood, I think that is a point that a number of councillors will have spotted, and I know that Councillor Crump already has. I have spotted it the same, and I'm sure that there are standard reasons why staff positions are sometimes left vacant, simply because people resign at relatively short notice and it's difficult to recruit in the meantime. So it can be, but I think your point of concern is this a deliberate policy and to maintain vacancies simply in order to save money, and what implications does that have, if any, for the performance that is produced as a result?
If I could just say, that was not my question and my concern, although you raise a very good concern there that I can't imagine that you'll be a standard policy, but if it is, we should know about it. No, my concern is functionality and capability of this council.
I think that's what I just said at the end, but take your point. Take your point. I'm sure Mr. Perks will comment.
Yes, just to confirm, there is no policy of holding vacancies open, as you suspected. There are challenges in recruitment. I don't think we would shy away from that, particularly in specialist areas. And when you look through the list in Table 1, I was just sort of scanning down, and the building control area is the most challenging at the moment, with the changes to the Building Safety Act and the registration requirements for those professionals. There are very few people in that pool that we're fishing for. We have a recruitment exercise going on at the moment. We lost our building control manager to another local authority, and with him he took one of his staff. So that's why that number appears larger than it would. We are recruiting to both those positions, and we have got some temporary arrangements in place with that. Beyond that, a lot of the variances in this table aren't strictly staff related. There's some with over recovery. So I think that's probably all I can usefully say. We're doing our best to recruit staff. Local government reorganisation doesn't make that any easier, but we're doing the best that we can.
Thank you for that. Councillor Woolley-Hoggins. Yes,
It is a specific item on the capital outturn that I'm concerned about, and it is the 2.5 million housing to rent acquisition budget is still entirely unspent. With yes, 138. Is that? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
And the reason I'm raising that is we know within this room and within this meeting what the reason for that particular housing to rent for particularly vulnerable residents, and I'm really asking if we have any update and really as to why the council still failed to acquire a single one in the year so far. I know we're still at the early part of it, but given housing pressure is repeatedly cited elsewhere in the reports before us, I'm asking for an update really
Sure.
as to how we're progressing, because
can
it's that important.
Can I just check that we're talking about the figure £2.5 million? Yeah, fine, thank you.
Actually say that.
Thank you. Yes, this is a concern for us because, as you say, it does affect the most vulnerable in society. We spent last year, since we had a new head of housing coming in, sort of making sure that we were clear what we were doing with this money with the housing strategy that was approved by council. I spent yesterday running through a spreadsheet of a selection of properties, analysing which ones we might go forward with. So we're actively on that at the moment. So hopefully we'll move quite quickly on that now.
Thank you for those reassurances.
Councillor Crump.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'll mix. I'll start on page 176 of the revenue one. And you're right, I think I counted at least 7 areas with salary savings. And I think one of them we noticed was in CCTV, which had a quite detrimental effect in the last quarter when we were talking about performance management. I think it was available 84% of the time, so 1/6 of the time it wasn't available. So, but I think that's been tackled. But that is one area that's quite noticeable where salary, where our vacancies can have a significant effect, and we all know how valued the CCTV service is. So I think there's some points there to notice. One point that could be aligned to it is the underspend on HR and training. Obviously, with lots of people fishing in the same pond in terms of staffing in local government, be it for specialists for LGR, be it for specialists on planning, etc. It would be good potentially to grow our own, if you want a better phrase. And I just wonder whether the HR and training budget could be utilised more effectively to ensure that we can grow our own, we can develop our staff to take on any vacancies when people do leave. So again, potentially suggested use of the money. So I've got one then, and I've got one small question on the capital one, if that's okay.
Just on that point about growing your own, the authority has made, well, I'm sure that the authority gives support to staff for continual professional development, but it's also deliberately made decisions in the past, for instance, to recruit trainee lawyers, and that scheme's worked well. Unless I'll come back to Councillor Crump on his capital question. I've got one. Did you want to answer it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Crump, we are very active in sort of trying to sort of grow our own, particularly in areas like planning, where we've got a lot of internal promotions. We bring people in as householder planners and move them up through. We've made quite a few changes to the training funding budget over the last 2 years to make it more favourable for people coming in. As the chairman pointed out, we've got a scheme for sort of bringing in trainee lawyers. So yeah, we are, where we can sort of do that, we are doing that. It's increasingly in some areas, for example, the CCTV, we literally can't have people working on the CCTV who aren't certified. So unless we keep spare people who we can't use who are certified, that there is a lag between doing that. And again, in building control now, we can't really grow our own for immediate use because you've got to be certified before you can do it. So as the certification things become more challenging, that does make that model a bit more difficult to implement in some areas, but it's definitely part of the solution going forward, and we're very alive to that.
Councillor Rice.
Yes, also on page 177, I am surprised to see the favourable position on off-street parking. I had it in my head from various comments that have been made in recent times that off-street parking was suffering due to lack of visitor to Stratford. And yet it seems to be doing extremely well. I don't know if it's possible to comment on that.
Through you, Chair. Yes, the off-street parking is quite a large budget, so that favourable variance is a relatively small percentage, but it's still very good news that we're sort of seeing the visit numbers recover. I'm speaking off the top of my head slightly here, but I think we did reduce the parking budget last year, so as we weren't being unrealistic about our expectations, leaving us with a shortfall sort of with visitor recovery post-COVID. So it's probably not the highest we've ever achieved on off-street parking, but it's definitely positive that it's a credit rather than a debit figure.
Can I say that your reply points the need, perhaps, or the advantage, perhaps, if these numbers set out not only the amounts of the variations, but the percentage of the variations set against their budget, because had that 89,000 figure been 2%, Councillor Rice may have had one view. If it had been 50%, he may have had another. So if your ears are open, I'd like to make the request that in future this table includes percentage against original budget as a help. I've got Councillor Ballinger next.
I think the key word here is favourable. It's favourable. There's lots of favourable words here, but I suppose the context behind it needs to be a bit more in depth. To your point, Chair, around figures, facts and figures. But there are some to note. Obviously, I was going to mention the off-street parking, but we've got refuse collection. We've got some big figures here. Like, I mean, for residents reading this, which is obviously accessible for people to read it, what does favourable mean?
This is accountant speak, and favourable means, well, this is reverse accountant speak, because in local authorities, an underspend is favourable, an overspend is unfavourable, but the signage is the other way around. Favourable means, in these terms, it's a positive. Unfavourable means it's a negative, i.e., it's less than budget, as opposed to more. It's as simple as that. It does not have any qualitative connotations about it. It's either plus or minus. Simple as that. Councillor Crump.
I just want to add on that, from the simple terms, favourable, if it was your bank account, if it was a favourable one, it would be increasing the amount of money you've got in your bank account. If it's adverse, it would be reducing the amount you've got in your bank account. Hopefully that explains that.
Go on.
I mean, I understand the concept around positive and negative, but for the general public reading this, it looks like it is quite positive in some respects. But I think what my comment is where we have the word favourable or unfavourable, there just needs to be some more context in terms of why it's favourable and why it's unfavourable, because the general public, the electorate that pays council tax, will not understand why it's favourable or unfavourable. That's what I'm trying to make the comment.
I'm not going to prolong that discussion, and I'm going to move on, because I've got my own particular.
Put one on the capital you're going to come back to me on, aren't you?
Yes, I will. I have another revenue issue to raise, and that is that if you look at the topic is interest on investments earned. If you look at the comparative figures for the last 3 years, if I compare the excess of revenue over budget, because in all 3 years we have produced a surplus. So if I look at the revenue against budget surplus set against the interest above that which was budgeted, to see the proportion to which what I'm getting at is, what's the proportion of the amount of the excess of revenue over expenditure? How much is due to excess interest earned above budget? A favourable variance indeed. If you go back to 23-24, in round terms, the actual excess was 3.3 million. The contribution of interest was 1.2 million in round terms. If you go back to last year, 24-25, the surplus, the excess was 2.2 million. The excess of interest was also 2.2 million. In other words, you could make the argument on these crude numbers that the amount of the excess revenue that the council generated was entirely due to excess interest earned. If you look at this year's figures, the revenue excess is 513k and the interest earned is 638k. In other words, the amount of excess interest earned, if it hadn't been earned, there wouldn't have been a surplus. Now, I know there are lots of other numbers you can take into account, and you need Richard Burrell here really in order to be able to say whether that is a fair point, because there are other bases, other figures in the numbers, and you need to know how they're constructed, etc., etc. But my thrust is that 3 years ago, the surplus was less than half was generated from excess interest earnings. This year, it's not at all. If we hadn't had the excess interest earnings. So my question is, is it fair to say to the Cabinet that they should be aware of the dependency, the increasing dependency in the outturn based upon excess earning of interest, because they're not in control of excess earnings? The Monetary Policy Committee decides what interest rates are going to be, and if interest rates decline significantly, what effect would that have on the Council's finances? And I'd simply ask the Cabinet to consider asking the finance function to undertake some scenario planning of change the assumptions, see what would happen, and see how the Cabinet would decide to cope with those variations. It's a cautionary tale, that's all. But I have Councillor Rice who wants to talk.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to take issue with what you've just said, given that, yes, it is 500,000, favourable, excess, call it what you like. However, it does include a figure of £750,000 that's been put into that table as an additional contribution to fund the staffing costs associated with local government reorganisation. Now that surely is not part of the run of expenditure that the council would normally take, and therefore you should perhaps consider the figure to be 1.2 million excess, rather than 500,000, and therefore your thesis is not entirely correct.
Thank you for that. It's a point I've debated with Mr. Burrell, and my counter argument is that the decision to allocate another £750,000 was required regardless. I mean, if the need for this 750k went away, your point would be correct. But there is a need, and it has to be financed from somewhere. So it has to be financed, and it has been financed, and that's what's reduced the excess to what it now is reported. So it's a good debating point, and I'm sure Mr. Burrell, if he's listening in the ether, will debate that. Councillor Woolley-Hoggins.
Yes, if we refer to page 182, notice 110.1, notifications of write-offs. There are several write-offs are listed, including 131,425 in council tax arrears across 171 accounts, and also the startling figure of a sundry debtor housing debts totalling £23,569 over 14 accounts. Can you tell me, please, what recovery action was taken before these were written off? And is the scale of this rising or falling year on year? And also, and it might be that somebody needs to come back to us about it, what measures are taken when these debts are are multiplying with individual householders in order to try to stop this from happening, because that's quite a significant write-off when lots of people are trying very hard to pay their council tax. Thank you.
Interesting questions, but I don't think, unless...
I can give a general
Oh,
we have a combination of things in play here, and we've changed that since Hannah Buckley joined us as head of communities, and in light of the sort of the economic circumstances that we're in at the moment. We have we're trying to split people into those who can't pay and those who won't pay. Those who won't pay, we have a fairly robust series of, we have 2 agencies that we use for collection of these debts. We pursue them as far as we possibly can. The ones that sort of get away, so to speak, or don't get paid, are generally people who've left and we can't trace, and the cost of recovery would exceed the cost of the debt. So we have fairly robust procedures in there. We're also currently trying to be more nuanced on those who can't pay. It's a statutory debt, so the fact that you can't pay it doesn't make it go away, but we're trying to sort of work with those through, and Hannah would be able to give you more detail on this, about agencies we've appointed to sort of try and sort of look at instalment terms, look at sort of mitigating the loss, giving them debt advice, financial advice, to get them into a position, making sure they're claiming all the benefits and the rebates to which they're entitled, to get them sort of into a square position as quickly as possible. If you nip that, that's a high level answer, but Hannah would be able to give you a more detailed answer on that, and it's certainly something that we have changed during the last 12, 18 months to try and sort of split that out a little bit more effectively.
And we do, of course, have an opportunity to raise that sort of question every time we consider the 2-monthly report, when the write-offs will be requested, consent for them. Going to move to Andy Crump, who wants to ask a question concerning capital.
Just points the pedant. I'm sure you'll be impressed by this, Councillor Harvey. On page, this isn't the question, but just for noting, on page 176, 177 and 178, it's the 25, 26 out-term position, not the 26, 27. Unless we've got future mystic mega abilities. And then another one is a general question regarding capacity. On page 141 in the capital, there's significant slippage amounts. We talk about the housing to rent, which then more than triples the budget. From 1 million to 3.5. Improvements to temporary and housing first accommodation, which goes from 40 to 160, so that increases by 4 times. And the infrastructure maintenance plan programme, and again, from 350 to just over 1 million, again, almost tripling the budget. So again, usually most reasons are useful and explainable. But again, it's just about capacity to deal with this. I know there will be some transferred from the housing to rent for future years, but just making sure we've got the capacity when you're suddenly increasing the budget by 2, 3 or 4 times to do the work.
Noted. Okay. On that basis, I'm going to conclude the discussion. Councillor Crump has other duties elsewhere that he must leave for. In which case, I'm going to turn to the last 2 items on the agenda, which are item 8, minutes of the Housing Delivery Advisory Group, which are to be noted. They are noted. And urgent business. I'm not aware of any urgent business. No. But before I close, Councillor Rolfe, something she wants to say.
Yes, sorry. It is a shame that we haven't got the work programme here, and obviously I did mention that to you earlier. I always like to see a work programme, and to that end I would like to add something to our work programme, which is I would like to bring in the Shakespeare Hospice and the Shipston Home Nursing representatives from both to come and give Overview and Scrutiny a breakdown of what they do. I think they came to Overview and Scrutiny at County Council last week, alongside Mary-Ann Evans and the name of the one in Leamington. Myton, thank you. And I think it highlights the condition of their funding and how they are extremely underfunded, and they have asked that I ask here they come along and explain their financial position to the Every Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rolfe. I take it that that would have general support around the table, in which case we will invite. And can I just say that the omission of the work programme as an item on the agenda was an oversight and has been spotted and has been rectified and will not happen again. Thank you for bringing it to my attention.
And just to follow up, I will send Angus the details of both CEOs of.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Contact details. On that basis, I close the meeting.